Hi, everyone. I'm David Kelly, Program Director for the eLearning Guild, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to a special Twist conversation. Today I have two guests with me, Aaron Silvers from Making Better and Andy Johnson from ADL. We might have some surprise guests to drop in as well. And we're going to have a conversation about data, analytics, and the Experience API. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hello there.
Hello.
So if we can get, before we get started in the conversation, if I can have each of you just take a moment to introduce yourselves to the people watching the video. Andy, if we could start with you.
Sure, I'm Andy Johnson. I'm with the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative. I've been involved with that project for over 10 years now, and I was one of the people that was most working with SCORM at the time it was developed. I continued to maintain that level of expertise, and I've been with the Experience API project since the start. I have a couple of my passions are designing learning experiences, in particular games. So in that way, Experience API is kind of the perfect fit for me.
Excellent. And Aaron?
I'm Aaron Silvers. I'm with a consultancy called Making Better with Megan Bowe. I am the ADL Community Manager Emeritus. I work with Andy on the Experience API from its inception. I also work not with Andy, but at the same time as Andy. ADL was a much bigger organization back then on SCORM, particularly around SCORM 2004, also going back about 10 years or 11 years or so. So booyah! That's how that worked.
There you go. All right, so we're here. You guys both mentioned xAPI, your experience with it, and the roles that you played in developing it. I know we could talk for probably an hour on this question alone, but I'm going to give you about 60 seconds. There you go. So I'm going to give you about 60 seconds just on this initial question. Give me a very Reader's Digest version of to answer the question of what is xAPI, and either one of you can start, and the other can add to the explanation.
Do we have to both do it in the same 60 seconds?
No, you can have 60 seconds each. I'm flexible that way.
Okay, that's fine. All right, fine. I'll start.
Aaron.
Experience API is quite simply it's like a globally recognized structure for describing learning activity in a way that every system that uses the standard can understand the context in which that learning activity took place. The reason why its strengths primarily are the fact that it is that data is interoperable across different systems, and that there is a means to get that data from one system to another. So you don't have vendor lock-in, you don't have these data silos where stuff gets in, but you never see the value of what's being tracked and reported.
So then I would add to that the two major things I would say about xAPI is that, one, it's human and machine readable, so that it bridges that gap between somebody who might understand programming languages and forcing things into variables. Experience API breaks down that barrier and links it to natural language, which is leads into the second piece, which is that it uses natural language, which when we're talking about experiences, it plays to human beings' strengths in that we can describe things using everyday terms and using our creativity, and we can use both those things to our advantage when doing tracking of learning and training.
Okay, so I want to dig down a little bit deeper into the definitions that you guys gave, because there's one of the things I've noticed in the conversations, even yesterday there was a conversation that went on Twitter about this, that there's confusion about, I think not even Experience API, but just the concept of an API in general. Because I saw the conversation on Twitter was describing, do you need Experience API or do you need an LMS, as if they were in the same context. Can you one of you talk a little bit about what an API is and how that relates to the system that is using it?
Sure, I can. An API is an application programming interface, which basically means there are different controls that one would use to send data from place to place, and different expectations one could have on that data. And Experience API just defines in a much more granular way how those different controls work, so that we have different what they call endpoints, in that the statements are handled by one endpoint, and different other types of data like learner profile data and session experience data, what would have happened during that learning session are all saved in different places, and the structure of that data is very, very defined in one way, but in another way very, very open. And that's what the I'd say one of the advantages to going with that approach. But an API again is just the controls that one can expect when programming.
So let me take that a little bit more broadly for the non-programmers who might be listening. Okay. So everything Andy said, dead on accurate. Let me put it in this context. The an API is basically like a way for different applications, different systems to point its data somewhere, where it can either send data to it or get data from it. Okay. Now that's important because when you think about what an LMS does, when people think about like how they use a learning management system today, whether they're going to take e-learning courses from it, or you are managing or administering the LMS, or you're getting reporting from it, whatever. That is an application. It's a piece of software, all right, and that has a human interface for it. But most LMSs, basically because they came from, their origins are from like the 90s, where we didn't really have APIs, all right. They're built to basically be standalone. They're basically built to do everything themselves. And what an API does is create basically like it's like a mail slot, all right, in your house. And you think about a mailman delivering the mail, picking up the mail, or the UPS guy dropping packages, leaving packages, picking up packages, sending them somewhere else. All right. Imagine that your LMS, Twitter, all these different things, all these different applications have an API. This is like their mail slot, and basically the data that we're talking about is this package that can be sent from one to another. It can collect, it can be reused, it can be refiled, shipped out to somewhere else.
Okay, so that's how these different systems are gonna talk to each other through this API. So Absolutely. Now, when Andy was mentioning in the technical, the things like the statements and the fact that they can be very complex and yet very simple. In the context of L&D, can you tell me a little bit more about these statements and put it in the context of how it applies? Because I know the xAPI can be used outside of the scope of learning and development, but the statements and the complexity of them, can one of you describe it in the context of L&D?
Aaron, you want to go first on that one?
Sure. So there's a couple different use cases that I think about when I think about like how a statement can be used. All right. One is, let's take a look at what we do with e-learning today. All right. Right now, what we track with e-learning in our LMS systems, because they all use SCORM, which is kind of like the model. It kind of provides a model of like what kinds of things every system can keep track of, and so most e-learning authoring tools they only they swing for like they manufacture the same runs, right? So it's basically like, okay, we're going to check a completion status, we're going to check our score from whatever assessment we have inside of an e-learning course. We'll do some bookmarking so we know what to go back to, whenever somebody leaves the course, like that kind of stuff. When we start talking about the Experience API, we can start getting more granular details where we can actually assign like any interaction, any button click, any next button click, whatever, how often a learner goes and uses the table of contents inside their their Articulate course, or how often they access a glossary element, or whatever, or what word they're even searching for inside that e-learning. Like you could use the Experience API to track all of those things, much the same way that a web developer or a web publisher would use like Google Analytics. And from that, you could then start to understand what is it that people are actually searching for inside of the learning management, inside of the e-learning. And like, if I could use that data as a designer, right, how might I improve this e-learning so that it gives people more of what they are asking for right away? And if the other stuff is important and they're not even looking at it, come up with a different way of presenting that material so that it becomes more visible to the learners. Now that right there is a very It's a very basic use case, and it's one that we can easily accomplish today with no other thing other than just basic support of Experience API as it exists, and an authoring tool such as like Lectora, for example, that allows for more granular tracking. That's all you need. Now, take that another step up. All right. You want to actually see like how that effectiveness in the e-learning, like what people are doing in the e-learning, how does that map to their performance in a different system? So let's say I'm creating sales trading. All right. Now I'm creating e-learning in sales. All right. And I'm tracking the types of things that people are doing with that sales trading beyond just the basic, like they completed it, they spent this much time in the course, whatever. Now we can actually understand what they're doing, but we could also maybe use the Experience API in embedding, mapping what they do in their like CRM system, their client relationship management system, and mash up that data using the API also. And now we have two different data sets, one during the training event, one after the training event, or even alongside of it, and we can start mapping the correlations between what are they learning about, how are they learning, and how are they performing. And that's something that currently no LMS does. Well, I should say no LMS, no SCORM side of an LMS does.
Andy, anything you would add?
Sure. So, okay, I guess I'm going to be as concise as I can in that when I think of learning and development with Experience API, I think when we talked about how learning and development used to work with tracking, we basically closed off what the wormhole was. There was a lot that went into instructional design, a lot of different things that, if you look at an individual learning experience, that happen within that context of learning, but then we shrunk it down and stuffed it into a small pipe to fit into what we call, these SCORM variables, or the data model that SCORM has. And Aaron was talking about completion, success, and scores. Well, now what we're going to do is we're opening that back up. So this xAPI now allows us back to the paradigm of let's track everything, and we don't have to filter anymore. It kind of reverts, and I hate to use I don't want to sound degrading to science, but it reverses the course of turning from having learning design as an art and forcing it into a science of computer science, back to changing it back into an art again, so that things that you design can all be tracked, and we don't have to worry about the science getting in the way.
That's a great point, because it brings me to my next question. I can see very easily the implications of going in this direction for a developer, for someone who's the coding developer. They have to create these statements. They're the ones who have to know how to technically work with xAPI. What are the implications for the other roles within L&D? So, for instance, the instructional designer, the one who's focused on the design, how does this impact their role? How do they have to adapt it to this new world? And also for the manager, for the person setting the strategy, the directors of the organization. What do they have to? How do they have to think differently? Are there things that they should be doing differently? How do you see their roles evolving? And Andy, I'll start with you this time.
Okay, so I would say that if anything, this makes the instructional designer go back to actually just having the single hat of instructional design. I think that in the last 10 years, they've been forced to put on multiple hats of being essentially a half programmer as well as an instructional designer. And Experience API alleviates some of that pressure to understand it, because you can have natural language conversations with people that are involved, programmers that are involved, and the programmers are going to be able to understand what you mean. And using common language that xAPI uses, like verbs and activities and actions and actors, is going to be easier for a conversation to be organic between those two. And then similarly for managers and instructional designers, managers don't have to have any understanding of programming, and there doesn't need to be that wide disconnect of having managerial experience and maybe some lack of technical experience. That's not going to be as big of an issue as it was in the past. So I see that kind of reversing course in that people can more or less embrace the roles they were originally designed for. I'd say if any additional roles are added, it's that of now of a data scientist, and looking at how are all these statements that I'm tracking going to be able to be used in ways that we're not thinking about right now within our organization. Looking more out into the future, rather than just the current design.
Excellent. Aaron, anything you'd add?
Well, I think Andy pretty much nails it on the head. So from let me go from the opposite, from the outside, from the top down, because that like a lot of our organizations, the manager is now going to be basically, is already the person who's interfacing with other parts of an organization, and identifying like, all right, so we have this kind of project that's coming up, and we're going to need to get these kind of resources from our department associated with that project and kind of get them up to speed. But training and learning and development is often like lagging at the trailing on the end of like even an IT project or something like that, where a lot of decisions have already been made to the point where it's just like, okay, basically the box has been created where there's this thing learning, everybody recognizes there is a need for learning and development in a new rollout, a new program rollout or a new sales venture or whatever, right? But the avenues and the vehicles by which that can actually occur have largely been defined by because the boundaries have been created. Now L&D has an actual like solution to bring to the table with an analytics capability that previously only IT would have, if an IT department has business analysts, right? And the unique thing about what it does for L&D is most people work with either both their IT department. Almost everybody in the organization has to work with IT, and almost everybody in the organization has to work with L&D, right? The difference is that L&D, this is where like you take care of the people stuff, and IT is where you take care of all the technology stuff, right? L&D now can actually approach their partners within the organization and say, look, we have analytical capabilities to help make sure that what the things that you actually want to do are actually happening, and we can support it holistically from the standpoint of how do we actually either get your people to competence, or once they're competent, how do we improve their performance, right? And we can do that, and now they'll have this capability to do that with data and backing that up. So from a managerial standpoint, now you're actually able to look for interesting problems to solve in an organization that either save money or make money, right? People tend to like that. Now, from a design standpoint, you are now free to be a designer. It does also create, as Andy was pointing to, the role for a data analyst or a data scientist within the organization, within the L&D organization, who can start, making sense of the data. Now, that doesn't mean hiring everybody from Stanford. This means figuring out, like, between the designer and a data person, identifying what are interesting things to track about our learning experience that would help us improve it based on the performance goals that we're looking to improve, or based on the competencies that we're looking to build. All right, that's a whole aspect of design in terms of the analysis part of ADDIE, or even the analysis part of SAM, if you want to go that route. All right, that largely, like, we pay a lot of lip service to, and we do our best to do it from an instructional design standpoint, but we have not really had the tools with which to actually peer into that, into like very deeply, like, what can we really impact in the organization? What can we really impact with these set of learners? Well, now we can do that, and the fact that we have that the technology makes it possible to do so means that we can actually start asking more interesting questions from a design perspective.
So now this is starting to develop some context for me, but I know for a lot of people, it's difficult for them to understand something without seeing examples. And one of the things I find interesting about the time that we're in now is we've been talking about xAPI for a number of years now. It's been conceptual, and as the spec has been taking shape, and now there's a certain aspect of maturity to it now. So yeah. I know that we've got some things coming up where people can start seeing these examples, and I want to talk a little bit about those. First one I'll start with Andy, because I know your time is short with us today, and I appreciate you taking time to meet with us. You helped the eLearning Guild develop one of our recent research reports that is exploring xAPI. Can you tell me a little bit about what that report is going to share for people?
Sure. That report, it's going to get into a lot of different details of designing with Experience API itself, some of the roles and responsibilities that I've already kind of talked to within your typical e-learning organization as it would use xAPI. It gets into some of the technical details of the documentation as well, in terms of how the basic structures work, how context is used to define learning experiences, and basically a lot of how the data analytics work behind it. There's a lot of different parts to that report, and I think it's a great high-level overview of everything that the Experience API can do from that high-level perspective. And then we've got some other reports that we're working with you guys too that are going to come out in the future that are geared to much more specific aspects of Experience API. So I'm looking forward to sharing those as well.
Yeah, the one that just came out recently that you guys helped develop, I've already heard some feedback from people who have read it, and the way you described it as the high level, it's helping people start to grasp this concept and understand where it is. So I appreciate the work you guys did on it, and it seems like it really delivered on that need to help people bridge this gap and start participating in this conversation. So I'm glad to hear that we've gotten some great feedback, and the other reports are going to help build on that, which is great.
Yeah, and I'm happy to help, and I think getting as many people in that door as possible, because this is something truly that we want to be an open source activity and to grow it as a community organically. We realize that with SCORM, a lot of times we locked who we thought that were the best people for a job for the job in a room, and we came up with the best decision with the minds we had available. But the more people we have involved with these decisions, the more use cases we have, the more we see that there are certain aspects of this that we might overlook, and just growing the spec with everybody involved, I think, is going to make a better product for everybody to use.
And you mentioned the use cases. That's what really is the part of the xAPI conversation that I personally am looking forward to. We are now starting to see those use cases. We're starting to see people put this in practice, and we've got examples about how the utilization of this spec can take our practice into new directions and open up opportunities that have not been available to us before. And I know we're going to be focusing on that at DevLearn later on this month. You're both involved in what we're referring to as xAPI Hyperdrive, which is a competition that is going to be taking place before DevLearn starts, the Tuesday before, where people can come, share their projects, and basically give an elevator pitch and say, this is how we're using xAPI, this is how we're innovating our practice. And we're going to have a number of sessions. We're going to have a judging panel that, Andrew, you're going to be participating. Aaron, you're going to be the MC of that particular event, and we'll be having people share those projects. And in addition to having the judges who are going to rate each one of them, the doors to that competition are open so that people can come in. You come into DevLearn early. You're there that afternoon. You can come into this room where we're going to be having this xAPI Hyperdrive competition, and you can see these elevator pitches. And those stories are what's really going to help people understand how putting this in practice can make a difference within their organization. So we're really excited about that. And that's only one part of the spotlight that we're putting on xAPI at DevLearn. The other part is the xAPI in Practice track, which is going to be going on throughout the entire conference. And Aaron, I know you're a part of that. You're going to be helping us out with that. We've got some case studies that are going to be part of that track, but I know that you've got some sessions that you're helping us out with that you're going to be doing to help people understand and put this into context as well. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the experiences that you're going to be creating as part of that xAPI in Practice session track at DevLearn?
Sure. So I think I'm signing up for like 3 different sessions, which is cool. One of them I'll be doing a lot with Andy and Craig and Jason from ADL, and that'll be kind of the highlights of like the 3 finalists from the xAPI Hyperdrive, and we're going to get into a discussion about like what makes for a successful xAPI project, especially like from the standpoint of both like what we really would love to see, as well as what would be a really good first project, and then a session that Megan Bowe and I have done that has been pretty popular, and we've seen more and more of a need for it, as like a first step before you even get into doing xAPI, but you want to get your organization ready for it. There's a lot of interest in kind of getting content strategy down, learning content strategy. And how does one go about actually doing that, especially when you're looking at a library in your LMS of probably hundreds upon hundreds of courses? You really don't know like what's useful, what's not. How do people find it? If you're going to actually make the leap into Experience API and start looking at using it for analytics on your learning, like how do you even there's a whole set of like structured activities that need to happen in order to get organized. And we're we're going to present on that. And then I think on Friday morning, we're going to have what seems to be a running gag for this session is a general Q&A the first thing in the morning on a Friday morning, the last day of a guild conference. It will probably be a packed house, unbelievably, when you get all the standards people, all the tech nerds, all even the design nerds, I would argue this time, and like really kind of get into like what's actually happening at the spec level. Where is it actually going to go? Andy and I have worked together from inside of ADL in leading the spec to where it is today. Andy's still there leading that charge. I'm now involved with the IEEE and pushing it into standardization, and I'm starting to, in consulting. We're working with a whole lot of people now. So you're actually going to be sitting, anybody who shows up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I hope to God that somebody brings coffee, expect that you're going to get the people who really know what's going on, both from where a number of different stakeholders invested in the spec itself are, where industry is actually going in terms of the vendors and the tools that are emerging on the market, where people who are or organizations who are actually starting to adopt already as the first or early adopters, and even I would say the early majority starting to be. Like, what are they actually doing, and what does that portend for the next 3 even to 5 years?
Excellent.
How's that for a pitch?
That's a very good pitch. Well, it sounds like there's a lot going on. There is going to be a lot going on at DevLearn around xAPI, and I'm really excited for it this year because the time seems very appropriate for it. We've got the use cases, we've got a spec that's got some maturity to it, that the standardization in place. You're both doing great work to take it to the next level. So for people that are interested in this, DevLearn is the place to be. So if you want to learn more about what's going to be going on with xAPI at DevLearn, I encourage you to visit our website, devlearn14.com. The DevLearn 14 Conference and Expo takes place October 29th through the 31st at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. devlearn14.com is where you can go for all the details and look for the spotlight on xAPI for all the details about the xAPI and practice sessions that Aaron was talking about, the xAPI Hyperdrive competition, including how you can participate. We're taking proposals for people who want to participate in that competition through October 10th. So please visit our website, devlearn14.com, for all the details.
Did you just read all that off?
What's that?
You just read all that off?
I did not. That's just off the top of my head. I've done this for twice.
Well done. Well played.
Yes, well done.
Aaron, Andy, I want to thank you guys so much for giving us a taste about what's going on with xAPI and hopefully inspiring people to join us at DevLearn to continue the conversation this October.
All right. Thanks, David.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, looking forward to see what the unconstrained mind can do it at DevLearn. That'll be cool.
I'm looking forward to karaoke with Andy.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Well, if they weren't inspired to come to DevLearn because of xAPI, that's going to push them over the edge. So thank you for sharing that. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time online in Twist Conversations. Take care, everybody.